Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with hosts Jimmy Hinton
and Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Well, we have a hot topic today. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, thank you to our patrons who support us and help make this podcast happen. If you would like to check out what Patreon is all about and how to become a patron, check out patreon.com/speakingout, and you'll land on our page and learn all about it. Okay, inmates being released into the public quietly as COVID rages on. This is an interesting phenomenon, and I don't think there's nearly as much media coverage and public outrage as there should be.
There's not, because it's kept quiet. It's interesting how the media preys on certain things, and this is not one of them. Yeah,
the big focus, of course, is the political campaigning that's going on, Trump versus Biden, and, of course, everything, all the toxic stuff that goes with reporting on that, but also the violence that's happening right now across the country. That's getting a lot of media coverage. What's unfortunately not getting coverage is all the inmates that are being dumped into our streets. And we want to emphasize the inconsistency with these policies. And quite frankly, I think that some of these judges that are doing this against the good advice of a lot of district attorneys, a lot of people are being blindsided by this, and judges are just releasing them like crazy. I think some of those judges ought to be sitting in prison, to be quite honest. So the question is, how many inmates are being released in the United States? Well, the short answer is nobody knows.
Right.
Nobody has a clue. We know that in California, 17,600 inmates have been released just in California.
That's a city.
Yeah,
that's a whole
absolutely
city full of people.
Yeah,
when you think about it, it is.
Yeah, and a lot of other states are following suit. I'm not sure how many. I tried to look it up, and guess what I found?
Can't find
crickets.
It. Yeah, right.
We know when it's happening, when somebody gets released from prison and they murder somebody. Then all of a sudden the media takes that up for a short time, and then it just kind of dissolves again.
What? I was going to say it's not even making page one. I'm finding it further back in the newspaper, and it's like, oh, by the way, this person was an inmate, and they got out and did this.
Yeah.
So it's not even making big headlines.
I've seen articles where officials will come out and they'll say, well, we're releasing nonviolent offenders only, and these are people who, they were slated to be up for parole or release within like 8 to 12 months anyway, right. And there are no violent offenders are being released, et cetera, et cetera. When I first heard that, I thought people need to be calling the bluff, because this just isn't true. It can't be true, because I know how politics works. I've worked with politicians. You and I have been to Harrisburg how many times? We know how shady and slimy politics are, and how incredibly dishonest politics are.
This whole thing is really messed up, Jimmy, really, really messed up. And in a judge's eyes, what might be termed nonviolent or ready to be released is not, in fact, always true, because working within the prison system, I've seen what has to happen before a person is actually paroled. And a lot of times they're paroled, they have to go back before the parole board 2, 3, 4 times.
Especially sex offenders.
Yes, absolutely. And now all of a sudden, these are nonviolent people and they're just spewing them on the streets.
Yeah. Well, the dirty little secret is they're not nonviolent people.
Right.
California notoriously released violent offenders. In fact, I'll pull up an article right here and show you guys. Let's see. Here we go. California. Amid COVID-19, California releases some inmates doing time for murder. Advocates push to free more. This is what blows my mind. Is that people are shouting, it's unfair that people are in prisons, and they're advocating for the release not of non-violent offenders, but of violent offenders. This is happening right now. Here's a story. I'll read a little bit of this, but just to highlight some of the points. Teresa Williams was 22 when she shot her boyfriend, drove 750 miles with him, bleeding in the trunk of his own car, and then dragged him into a Northern California motel, tied him to a chair, and left him to die. He wasn't even dead yet. 750 miles.
I'm shaking my head because I think we live in a time where so much is changing, whereas anything goes. And it's all about don't punish the person too much. This is awful to do to them. I mean, after all, I'm seeing where convicted of murder, she gets a college degree after 19 years in prison. Who cares? Look at the violent murder she carried out. Her sentence was in place for a reason. Do we just suddenly extend all mercy and say,
well, apparently we do,
yeah.
which is not legal as far as I know. I'm not an attorney, don't pretend to be one, but doing these early releases just for the sake of it is insanity. This spring, the state expedited the release of 3,500 inmates because of the coronavirus. And in July, it freed 2,345 others early. Thousands more eligible for release, including at least 6,500 deemed to be high risk because of medical conditions that make them especially vulnerable to COVID-19. So, in other words, as long as you're vulnerable to COVID-19, your crime doesn't really matter. If you as an inmate are vulnerable to getting sick from COVID-19, we're going to release you. Those are the terms, period. Here it goes on. It still talks about Williams. Williams, 44, walked out of a women's prison in Chowchilla, California on July 29th, lopping decades off her 84-year to life sentence for killing. Where's the justice in this?
It's a mockery right now. This is a mockery of our legal system right now. And some people may say, well, you don't want COVID-19 sweeping through the prison, do you? How about isolating these people like's being done?
Put them in a separate wing of the prison.
Put them in a separate wing, keep them isolated if they're high risk. And they do have ways of doing that. Rather than why would you release them among the public? If they're high risk and they catch this, they're going to spread it to others anyway. Who did not in any way, shape, or form deserve to be, inflicted with this COVID. Not saying that they do, but put them in isolation.
Right.
That's not so hard to do. We didn't release all of our people from nursing homes.
Right. Exactly right.
We sure didn't.
Unless you're Pennsylvania's health secretary who removed her mother from a nursing home.
Special privilege, you're right.
As they were dumping COVID positive patients into nursing homes.
Right.
Yeah. The double standard. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, this paragraph, but in Williams' case and in others, officials have drawn the ire of prosecutors, victims' rights advocates, and family members amid questions about which and how many inmates are being released and whether it's being done with enough transparency to protect the public. It's not. That's why these people are upset. That's why they're drawing ire. Okay, so, this is happening all over the place. How about this one that was in the news just this past week? Carla Dominguez was murdered by her alleged rapist, immediately after he was released in a Virginia prison on $25,000 bond, Alexandria, Virginia.
That's our neighbor, pretty much.
Yeah, not far down the road. I'll pull this article up as well. So here we go. Girl slaughtered after her alleged rapist was released from jail over COVID concerns. An alleged rapist killed his accuser after being released from jail over concerns he and his lawyers would contract the coronavirus. So in other words, the attorneys were saying, well, it's putting us at high risk when we go into the prison to sit with our client. We could be exposed to coronavirus. And you know what? I should be careful. I'm trying to hold my tongue back. The fill in the blank judge granted this and did it secretly. This was like a secret backdoor deal. According to the Washington Post, Ibrahim, I don't know how you pronounce his last name. Bouaichi hunted and killed his accuser, Carla Dominguez, after being released from jail because of concerns the Wuhan coronavirus would put him and his lawyers at risk of falling ill. He was indicted on charges of rape, strangulation, and abduction after Dominguez, a native of Venezuela, told law enforcement in Alexandria, Virginia, that he sexually assaulted her in October.
I really believe that whoever released him should be held accountable.
I think whoever released him should be in prison.
Right. And that's what I'm saying, should be held accountable. This is not acceptable at all.
So 11 days after his indictment, this guy, Bouaichi, turned himself into authorities, and a judge ordered him to be held without bond. Would you say he was a little high risk?
A little bit.
His lawyers requested bond, arguing their client would not be safe from the Wuhan virus because it was impossible to provide adequate social distancing and other safety measures behind bars. This is insane. This is insane. And what happens, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is that this makes the biggest mockery of justice to the victims.
It does.
Think about her family. Think about her parents, her brothers, her sisters, her aunts and uncles.
So outraged at our legal system. I would be spitting fire and nails. I really would. But that still wouldn't bring her back.
No.
It is just so wrong.
And this is happening in droves all over the place. So here's another article. This is the last article we're going to show. But as a result of this death in Virginia, they started looking into it. So here we go. Look, what do you know? No system tracking inmates released because of COVID-19 in Northern Virginia, Fox 5 learns. Oh, well, shocker. I'm shocked. I'm sitting here in shock right now. You mean there's no system to track them once they dump them out into the streets?
Just leave.
Because the poor little people might get COVID.
Leave. Yeah. Go find a nice, cozy place. Right.
Reaction tonight after Fox 5 has learned in Northern Virginia, specifically Alexandria City, that's where this murder took place. There's no system in place to track which inmates have been released due to concerns surrounding the coronavirus transmission. That's awful comforting for the families of the victims, for the victims and their family members. All these people who sexually harass, who stalk, who are domestic abusers.
Number one, I find it hard to believe there's no way of tracking them.
There is a way. They're just not doing it.
Right. They're just not doing it because they don't want to. They didn't just release people and all of their records suddenly disappeared. On those records are all kinds of notations. You know that. This private stuff is confidential, when they're up for parole, how many times they went for parole. You don't just release them, and then you can't track them. You can't tell who was released because of COVID.
Right.
No way.
Right.
Blatant lie.
And what's infuriating about this is that this poor woman never stood a chance to live.
No,
she didn't even know this guy was out.
Awful. It's terrible.
She didn't stand a chance.
No. He hunted her down and murdered her.
This is the same jurisdiction going on in this article, the same jurisdiction where a young woman was murdered by a man accused of raping her. That man was released due to COVID-19 after being previously held without bond. By the way, people are going to jail for opening their businesses and trying to feed their families.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Those people are going to jail, while tens of thousands of people are being released.
There were over 400 businesses that received citations over the weekend in the state of Pennsylvania for not adhering to our governor's social
they're being fined. They're having liquor licenses revoked. Right. They're being put in jail.
Ridiculous. And then we see stuff like this.
It's insane.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is.
Without commenting on any specific case, a spokesperson for Alexandria says ultimately when it comes to jail releases because of COVID-19, that's because of COVID-19 specifically. Point one, the judge decides on a case-by-case basis. So the judge decides, not the district attorney, not prosecuting attorneys, not law enforcement. A judge decides
I'm
that.
kind of laughing, Jimmy, because when I was teaching in the prison last year, I would watch guys when they wanted to get out of class. They were great fakers.
Mm-hmm.
They felt faint.
Yeah.
They felt dehydrated because of the heat. They needed out. They wanted to go to the nurse's office, like little school kids would do. And if they faked it, said, I'm feeling all these symptoms. They have ways to look everything up in prison. All they have to do is come up with 3 things and they're out. I'm sure they're out.
Absolutely.
You didn't want them in there.
Yeah.
Get out.
It doesn't help when you have the attorneys being crybabies too. No, we might get sick too. You're putting us at risk. And then a judge falls for it and they're releasing these violent inmates. Here's another point in Alexandria. No one is officially notating which inmates are being released based on COVID-19 risks. So not only are they dumping them out in the street, there's no way to track them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to tell which ones are violent and non-violent. There's no rhyme or reason to this. They literally just release them quietly into the streets.
Because when thousands are being released, it's not like 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking many are being released from the prisons. Suddenly you see a whole cell, an area that's empty. You don't know what's going on.
And don't think the other inmates in that prison don't know too.
Know what's going on.
And that amps up their requests to get released.
Are you
now all of a sudden,
me?
Everybody's high risk in the prison.
Outrage, the whole thing. If he got out, then why am I not getting out? What did they do to get out? I want to do it. The whole thing. It's a spiral. It's a nasty big spiral. Yeah.
The last point here that this official this spokesperson made, and furthermore, there's no requirement mandating inmate releases be classified as a release due to the coronavirus. The city says the only way to know if somebody was released due to the coronavirus pandemic would be to read the transcript of any bond hearing, which still would not have to include the premise of the release. So even if you can get a hold of the actual bond release, even then they're saying, but it doesn't matter. You read it all day long. They don't have to state the reason why they were bonded out.
Does this make you think maybe there's a lot of crooked stuff going on right now? Maybe.
Oh, absolutely. But also what it makes me think is that there are people like my dad who is a lifer who may one day knock on my door.
I fear that.
I do too.
I really
it can happen. It is happening.
That. And he, by his own admission in letter after letter after letter to you, says, if I get out, I'll just go back and do the same thing I was doing before.
Absolutely. He told me before, if I got released tomorrow, I would abuse another kid tomorrow.
Yes.
He told me that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And these are the people being released. A couple points that we have, there are a lot of people in prison that don't see pedophiles as violent. They see them as non-violent because they think violent offender is somebody who, beats and murders and, uses baseball bats,
or a knife and something like
some sort of weapon. But the state classifies violent offenders. In fact, my own father, he's an SVP, sexually violent predator. He's sexually violent because he hunts people.
Right.
It's not that he's physically violent. It's that he's sexually violent. And people don't realize that These designations are really important.
Harm that has been done. What's interesting, Jimmy, is while in prison, you know it, I know it, he's made wonderful friends among the COs.
I was going to say, including the staff. They
like him.
They love him.
Because he's just this wonderful, calm-natured person.
He's the model inmate.
And
guess who the first people to be released are?
Right.
It's the sex offenders.
Absolutely. Because of this.
Yeah, because of good behavior.
If you looked at him and a whole bunch like him, they're not going to appear to be violent in the terms that we think of violence.
Right.
Not at all.
Yeah, it's insane. So what does the release of these molesters and other people, this guy, the guy who killed this poor woman, young, pretty lady too. He took her life away just a few days ago.
Right.
What does this mean? The release of the child molesters, the violent inmates, what does that mean to those who've been abused? Well, a whole number of things. Fear, recurring nightmares, PTSD.
Well, just like you said, you fear that one day you're going to wake up and see your dad knocking at your door. What happens then? What happens?
Oh, I don't worry about myself. I know what would happen really
I'm
quickly, and it wouldn't be a pretty scene. But his victims.
His victims,
or the victims of any of these people,
they have a little bit of peace knowing that he's locked away.
Right. That's
where he can't harm anybody.
That's why it's called
else.
Justice.
Yes, absolutely. But when these people, and I will call them wolves, as we talked about last week, are released, they have not changed.
Mm-mm.
A violent person, a violent sex offender is always a violent sex offender.
Yeah. So, like we said, it's justice is being thwarted because these poor people might get sick. It's not that they aren't. That's what's frustrating too. It's not that they're sick. It's not that they've tested positive for COVID. It's not that there's a really high risk that they will get COVID. It's that they could get COVID.
I'll tell you what I think is
that's
happening
what's infuriating
in the prisons, because having been in for almost 15 years in and out of the prison, they whine, they cry, they demand, they make you would not believe the demands that are made every single day. COs are afraid for their own lives, not because of COVID, but for physical violence. If enough of these guys get riled up, they would stir things up and cause a big fight to break out. And I think the COs are just afraid and just figure, let them out. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. Get them out of our hair. We don't want to see them. We don't want to deal with it.
It's interesting too. I have friends who are corrections officers, and exactly 0 of them are actually afraid of contacting or contracting the coronavirus.
Right.
None of them. And so this whole notion that this is terrible and it's it's sweeping the prisons and my goodness, it's this epicenter of COVID. I've not seen any evidence to that effect, at least in our area.
We have 2 large prisons. I haven't heard
2
of
massive prisons.
Anything
not at all. Not a whisper in our town. I mean, I can see
large prisons.
I can almost see the SCI Laurel Highlands where Jerry Sandusky is.
Right.
Jerry Sandusky is
by it every day.
2 miles from right where we're sitting right now. Jerry Sandusky's in one of our state prisons in town, 2 miles away. There's another state prison in Somerset that you can see from the one prison.
From there.
You can see the prisons from the other. You're talking
and they are full.
What is it? About 6,000 inmates.
Oh yeah.
The whole population of our town is in 2 state prisons in our town.
Yes, absolutely.
And you're exactly right. Not one case of coronavirus, but I'll bet you if we call the prisons and ask them if they've released inmates, I'll guarantee you they've released
they have.
Hundreds of them.
I know why. I know they have. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
I know they have.
So, what does this mean for the innocent? The early release means one thing to the abuser. They can go right back to it. They know they're not being tracked. It's not a secret. In fact, I have a very good friend who sits on the parole board at a state prison. And he said, I asked him specifically, I said, what happens to inmates once they're paroled or once they're on probation, or if they bond out or whatever? What happens to that inmate? He laughed. And he said, your guess is as good as mine, buddy.
Well, I'll tell you.
Don't they have officers that they have to answer to? POs. They have POs that they have to answer to. And he said, those people out in the field, he said, I used to be out in the field. I used to be a probation officer out there, outside of the prison walls. And he said, I'm telling you, I did the bare minimum because these guys, especially the sex offenders, didn't give me any trouble. And he said, so as long as they didn't give me trouble, I wasn't going to invade their privacy and come into their home and, be a jerk to them. If they were being nice to me, I was cool with them. And he said, now that I know about sex offenders, he said, I would do things completely differently. But he's like, I was green back then.
Right now, this is a haven of wonderfulness for these offenders because things are running at such a slow pace. A lot of people are laid off yet.
Including our court systems.
Yes. And things are not running at full tilt. These offenders know it.
Yeah.
I have know an offender who said to me, my parole officer doesn't even want to hear from me. Yeah. He said, shoot me a text. He said, I want to try. I want to travel out of state. Am I going to get in trouble? He said, I won't even know about it. He said, shoot me a text and just say, hey, I'm okay. That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about it. That is frightening. That is not acceptable. That's what's going on.
What's frustrating about that too is, I know from talking to my friends in prison what the procedure is to be able to go out of state. It is a lengthy, massive approval process just across state lines. Yeah, shoot me a text.
In fact, he's going this weekend.
Yeah.
And his parole officer, he contacted him. And the guy says, just shoot me a text and just say I'm okay.
Yeah.
That's it. I don't want to hear if you're out of state.
Here's another point we have. Children become the target of the abuser once again.
Yeah.
Only now the abuser has a very real high because guess where he should be?
Right.
And he knows that.
And he knows it. And now look at this.
And now he knows I went before a judge.
Man.
And these judges in the offender's mind, these judges are stupider than these people at church.
Yep. Absolutely.
I heard my dad talk about how stupid people are at church. He's like, I can't believe people are that stupid, that gullible.
Yeah. Yep. Now
That's how the inmates talk about them.
Looking at them and saying, well, you're at risk. You need to go.
Yeah.
Go.
These guys are laughing. Go. They're laughing at us.
Of course they are.
And our last point here, our children are the ones and adult victims who survive the abuse. They're the ones who suffer. The work that the advocacy has done in the last several years is not only greatly hindered, I would say we're fighting such an uphill battle to begin with. There were a couple things that happened this past week I'm not really at liberty to talk about, but I contemplated leaving advocacy and just I was actually online looking at different jobs, to be honest.
I didn't know that, James.
Yeah. Well, it's usually when I do that, that's my way of processing and venting. I'm not really looking for another job. It's my way of coping with the discouragement of our crappy justice system.
It is disheartening to see all the wrong that is being done. And for every step that advocacy makes forward, there's 10 steps that shove it, all the work backward.
Yeah. I mean, we fight so hard to protect the innocent and the vulnerable. And it's so many days it feels like an impossibility. Now, I know that's not reality because there are different ways other than jail and prison and things like that. There are ways to protect people from slimy abusers.
I think
But if we're going to lean on the justice system, don't get your hopes up.
No.
And
one
it's a very
thing we
flawed
need to
system.
remember is the percentage of abusers that actually end up in prison is very small. this old land is filled with abusers that will never make it into the court system. So
the vast majority will never make it into the court system.
But it is very upsetting to think that now we're being spilled with more and more, to the point of where I feel like it's an overabundance of evil. It's just so much evil surrounding our children.
Well, give us a couple tips, things that people can do, because we don't want this to be a depressing episode where we're like, well, you're totally helpless. What are some things that people can do right now, today?
Number one is call your legislator. Be a voice that is that nagging voice, that voice that won't go away. Call every day, make one phone call every day if you have to, and voice your concerns about this. They do listen, believe it or not. Yeah. They do.
Well, especially if you threaten the media. They don't want the media.
They do not want that.
And if a senator's aware and they're silent that this is going on,
right,
that's not going to look good for them, and it shouldn't.
Will not. If you live in a city where we have prisons, go and ask you have access to call the parole board. You have access to call people in charge. Say, hey, what's going on? What's the deal in our prison? I have concern for our community. We have the right to write letters to our editor. We have the right to voice our concerns. We can do those things. If we know of a prisoner who has been released, it is our moral duty and responsibility to alert others around us.
And that's going to be a challenge to find out who they are, because this is all being done very secretively. This is very hush hush. This is very quiet. These are backdoor deals that are going on right now.
And some of these guys have been in prison for a good while, and they've been,
they know how to lay low too.
Absolutely. They've learned some skills while in prison, but they're not perfect, and I think something we need to remember is we have the Almighty God on our side. We truly do. I believe that with so much, with my whole heart, that if we just keep on the path, we keep focused, we keep doing our work, we can keep swimming, and we will eventually come to head with this battle. This is just a new battle, another, a big rock that's been thrown in the path. We can get over it.
Yeah,
we truly can.
But we need to be proactive.
We need to work together. We have to. And we have to be that voice that is heard. We have to speak out. We can't shrink back and say it's too big, it's too much. There's nothing I can do. There is something we can do. We must do it. Yeah. We must.
Well, we'll leave you with this truth bomb. A wolf never changes. Remember that. The wolf has one purpose in mind: to find the innocent sheep and destroy. Don't fall for the lies of the wolf, and keep your guard up at all times. Just be aware. It is fact that tens of thousands of inmates are being dumped into the streets as we speak. That's not to be an alarmist. That's not to exaggerate. It's happening. It's happening right now.
Right, Jimmy.
So be on guard and help protect your family, your neighbors. Look out for these guys and
be on high alert. That's what
call your legislators.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for tuning in this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.